You'll crawl out of here.
Give me 5 minutes.
Picture this. We are standing in the sweltering heat of a Detroit summer, right where the city stops pretending to be polite. The air is thick with exhaust and tension. A massive bearded man named Garrett Steele just threw down a challenge that hung in the air like heavy smoke. $5,000 to anyone who can fix his dead motorcycle. He slammed that impossible question down on the concrete, demanding an answer from the crowd. And then a skinny 18-year-old kid stepped up. Before anyone else could even blink, the kid looked the biggest, meanest biker in the eye and said he could fix it. Garrett glared at Owen, a skinny, grease-covered 18-year-old. He demanded to know who let the cockroach in. Grabbing the kid by the throat and slamming him against the wall. "You smell like a sewer," Garrett growled, spitting right on his cheek. 15 real mechanics failed, and you think you can do it? Another biker kicked Owen's toolbox, sending wrenches clattering across the hot asphalt. Owen calmly wiped his face, knelt, and picked up his wrench. Garrett gave him 5 minutes, swearing his club never loses to garbage. But nobody in that parking lot knew this kid was about to humiliate every expert in the city, right there at the iron rail. A windowless concrete bunker at the gritty dead end of Michigan Avenue. Every summer, 15 riders rolled into this spot with exhaust pipes roaring loud enough to rattle windows 3 blocks away. At the center stood 50-year-old Garrett Steele, chapter president for 11 years. His word was absolute law, and his bike, a 1972 Shovelhead known as Black Fury, was untouchable. His father built that engine by hand in 1971, making it family bloodline. So when Black Fury died on Interstate 94 with a sickening sputter, Garrett refused to call a tow truck. Instead, he immediately called Dale Prescott. Dale ran the biggest garage in Wayne County, boasting 40 years of experience and a wall full of fancy certificates. He was the guy you called for a sure thing. Dale arrived with 2 assistants and a scanner worth more than a luxury car. He spent 30 agonizing minutes working before wiping his hands and shaking his head. He claimed he could not figure it out, saying it might be the engine block and would take 3 weeks to rebuild. Garrett stared through him, asking if this expert was giving up. Dale tried making excuses, but Garrett told him to leave before things got violent. Dale packed his tools and fled. The watching crowd stayed quiet, though a few men smirked. 40 years of experience, and he could not even find the problem. Next up was Nolan Briggs, the premier vintage motorcycle specialist in all of Michigan, a guy who practically had motor oil running through his veins. Let's look at Nolan together. He had been rebuilding these machines since before Owen was born. He spent 45 minutes pulling the carburetor apart, cleaning every jet and checking every gasket like a trained surgeon. He tried the kickstart 6 times. Absolutely nothing. Not even a sputter. Nolan wiped his brow and declared the engine was simply dead, saying these old models eventually hit a wall. Garrett completely snapped. He grabbed Nolan by the collar, yanking him close, snarling that he was supposed to be the best in the state. Nolan choked out that he was, but the bike was permanently finished. Garrett held him for 3 terrifying seconds before shoving him so hard that Nolan tripped right over his own heavy tools. Garrett roared at the man to get out of his sight. Garrett paced the asphalt, calling them all useless and pathetic. The crowd had swelled as word travels fast when bikers get angry. 60 people pressed against the fence watching the show. Enter Curtis Wade, an aerospace engineer turned consultant. He showed up with a laptop, a voltage meter, and a smug smile. He plugged in, ran diagnostics, and studied complex wiring diagrams. He looked incredibly thorough, yet 20 minutes later he delivered his verdict like a grim doctor. He demanded a total engine replacement, rattling off parts like a new crankshaft and cylinders. He estimated a massive bill of $8,000 to $12,000 for the 1972 model. Garrett's jaw clenched so hard the thick veins in his sweaty temple looked ready to violently burst. Garrett roared that 3 experts wanted a fortune for something they failed to understand. Curtis closed his laptop, saying he did not invent physics. Garrett snarled that he was wasting time, and Curtis walked away. Left alone beside Black Fury, Garrett felt the heavy Detroit heat pressing down. He yanked a thick roll of $100 bills from his vest and slammed it onto a table. $5,000 in raw cash. He offered it to anyone who could make the machine run within 1 hour, right on the spot. No shop visits, no excuses. The crowd fell into a suffocating silence. Not one hand went up to claim the $5,000 baking in the bright sun. That is exactly when Owen walked past the lot. He did not care about motorcycles, and he was not looking for a quick payday. Owen was walking home from a grueling double shift. 6 hours at a car wash, then 4 hours stocking shelves. His shoes were splitting, and his shirt smelled of cheap soap and exhaust. He had exactly $11 and a library book in his bag. But then he heard something. Not the rowdy crowd or the loud music. He heard the motorcycle. He heard a secret hiding in the silence. It was a faint metallic whisper coming from the engine block, a sound so subtle that expensive scanners, seasoned hands, and fancy laptops had completely missed it. Owen stopped in his tracks. He tilted his head, closed his eyes for half a second, and he just knew. He strolled toward the bike with his hands buried in his pockets, moving slowly, like he had nowhere else to be. Garrett spotted him from 15 feet away, demanding to know what he was staring at. Owen simply replied that he knew what was wrong with the bike. Garrett looked at Owen's ruined shoes, stained shirt, and skinny arms. Then the man let out a cruel laugh designed purely to humiliate, mocking the kid to his crew. The crowd rippled with nasty laughter. A massive biker with neck tattoos stomped over, flicking Owen's ear hard enough to sting, teasing that daycare was down the street. Another thug yanked the backpack off Owen's shoulders and dumped it onto the asphalt. A crushed sandwich, a water bottle, and a library book spilled out. The biker grabbed the book, mockingly reading the title about internal combustion engines aloud. The entire parking lot howled at the cruel joke. The biker dropped the textbook into a puddle of oil and stomped on it, sneering that his education belonged in the dirt. Without a word, Owen retrieved the book, wiped it with his sleeve, and tucked it away. Garrett watched with arms crossed, asking if the kid needed another lesson. Owen stood straight, locking eyes with him, and repeated that he could fix it. Garrett moved with terrifying speed, getting right in Owen's face. You could practically smell the whiskey and grease baked into his skin. Garrett held up his scarred fists, bragging about cracking skulls, then pointed to 15 bikers who had done much worse. He mocked Owen's ripped shoes, furious that this nobody thought he could repair his father's machine. With a dark snarl, he violently shoved the teenager backward. Owen stumbled backward. Garrett screamed that the boy was nothing, swearing he would never be more than a worthless nobody. Picture this scene with me for a second. 60 people had phones out, running live streams filled with mocking reactions. Not one person told them to stop. Owen just picked up his bag and stood tall. He offered his terms. 5 minutes. If he failed, he would wash every bike in that lot for free. But if he succeeded, Garrett had to pay the $5,000 and apologize out loud to his face. The parking lot fell into dead silence, then completely erupted. Enraged men slammed fists on tables, screaming in disbelief. A half-empty beer bottle shattered 2 feet from Owen's legs as a biker laughed that the kid actually wanted an apology from a hardened gang. Garrett flashed a predator smile and added a brutal condition. When the kid failed, he would have to crawl out on his hands and knees past everyone. Owen calmly agreed. Garrett spit into his palm, and the teenager shook it without hesitation. But here is the secret no one in that lot could guess. Owen Fletcher had been rebuilding complex engines since he was 9 years old. That faint metallic whisper from the motorcycle, he had heard it 100 times before. He heard it in his father's garage on his workbench, with his father's steady hands guiding his own. Stick with me, because what happens next changes everything. His father, Thomas, never owned a single thing that was not broken first. His old garage sat right on the rough corner of Gratiot and Concord in East Detroit. Picture this shop out east of Woodward Avenue. A cinder block box with a leaky metal roof, no sign out front, just a gravel lot, and a reputation that traveled by word of mouth. Folks brought Thomas the engines nobody else would touch. When 3 shops declared a 1965 Mustang dead, Thomas had it running in 2 days. He rebuilt a frozen boat motor on a Saturday, while young Owen watched from an overturned bucket. When Owen turned 9, Thomas handed him a wrench and said, "Feel the bolt first. Let the metal talk to you." Owen did not understand yet, but he loved being in that garage, soaking in the smell of oil and steel, listening to his father hum, and watching him hold parts up to the light like he was reading a story written in the scratches. By age 10, Owen could name every part of a 4-stroke engine blindfolded. Thomas would hold a scrap piece behind the boy's back, and Owen identified it by touch alone. Connecting rod, piston ring, rocker arm, every time. By 11, Owen heard layers in running motors. Where most people heard noise, Owen heard instruments. The intake valves had a pitch, the exhaust had a rhythm, and the timing chain kept a tempo. He caught flaws like a pianist detecting a flat note. Thomas tested him with a loosened rocker arm, and Owen found it in 8 seconds. When Thomas hit a crack in an exhaust manifold, Owen pointed right to the faulty cylinder in under 1 minute. "You have got the ear, son," Thomas told him. "No school teaches that, and no machine replicates it." Thomas repeated one phrase every single day. "Listen before you touch. The engine tells you everything." It became instinct wired into Owen's bones. Then, when Owen was 14, Thomas died. He was under a delivery truck for a routine brake job when the jack failed, dropping 7,000 pounds of steel on a man who weighed 180 pounds. The ambulance took 11 minutes, but Thomas was gone in 4. Owen did not cry at the funeral. He walked into the garage the next morning, sat on his overturned bucket, and stared at the pegboard wall. Every tool sat in its exact place, grit worn into the handles. Slowly, Owen picked up his father's favorite wrench, a 1/2-inch Craftsman with a chip on the jaw, and held it tight for a very long time. For 4 years, Owen taught himself what Thomas never finished teaching. He studied online tutorials at the library and read battered engineering books bought on 7 Mile for 50 cents each. He hauled dead engines from 8 Mile salvage yards, rebuilt them, and sold them for $50 or $100. When Owen turned 16, the shop went under from back taxes. His grandmother, Ruth, could not pay on her fixed income, so the county seized the property. Owen stood watching a stranger padlock his father's garage shut. He took only the toolbox, wrapping the tools in a bedsheet inside his backpack. By 17, he worked 11-hour shifts 6 days a week at a car wash and gas station, giving every paycheck to Ruth for groceries, while keeping nothing except bus fare. Every night, Owen sat on the fire escape of their Chain Street apartment, closed his eyes, and listened. He heard trucks on the freeway and generators down the block. When a neighbor's Buick idled rough 3 floors below, Owen diagnosed it from the stairs: bad ignition coil cylinder 2 misfire. A week later, the neighbor spent $400 at a shop to replace that exact coil. Owen was always right, but he never had the chance to prove it. Until tonight. until black fury, until a parking lot full of racers looked at Owen Fletcher and saw nothing. They were about to see everything. At 7:47 p.m., a kid held up a stopwatch app on his cracked phone and yelled, "5 minutes, go!" Owen did not rush. Owen set his backpack down and pulled out his father's dented olive green toolbox with T. Fletcher scratched into the lid. He laid out his gear in a neat row: a 1/2-inch Craftsman wrench, a 1/4-inch socket set, 2 screwdrivers, and a taped flashlight. No scanner, no laptop, no voltage meter. Garrett laughed hard. "Are you kidding me? My kid's toy set has more than that." His crew roared as one guy booted a wrench across the asphalt. "Hope you did not need that one, rat." Owen picked it up, wiped it on his shirt, and put it back in line. Then a biker named Vince, 6'4" and 260 pounds with a skull tattoo on his neck, loomed directly over Owen, blocking the light. He whispered, "You have 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Better start crawling now. Save yourself the embarrassment." Owen ignored him, knelt beside Black Fury, placed both palms flat on the engine block, and closed his eyes. The crowd fell quiet out of sheer confusion. "Look, he is praying!" someone yelled. "The kid is actually praying to the engine!" another shouted. "Pull this clown off before he drools on the chrome." A beer can bounced off the asphalt next to his knee, but Owen never flinched. Garrett yelled, "Yo, circus boy, clock is running. You here to fix a bike or take a nap?" Owen heard none of it. His palms pressed against the cooling fins, fingers spread across the cylinder heads. He felt the steel exactly how Thomas taught him, not with his hands, but through them. Slowly, he leaned in closer and pressed his ear against the rocker cover. Owen tapped the engine block 3 times with his knuckle. Light, precise, like a doctor checking a heartbeat. Garrett's smirk faded slightly. He had never seen anyone touch a bike like that. 40 seconds in and he is making love to my engine. Garrett scoffed. "Somebody get this creep off my Harley." Owen opened his eyes and grabbed his flashlight. He aimed the beam at the primary chain cover, moved it to the carburetor bowl, then checked the ground wire junction at the frame bolt. 3 spots, 3 seconds each. He stood up. 3 problems, Owen said calmly, like he was reading a grocery list. Not 1, 3. That is why nobody could fix it. Every mechanic found 1 issue, assumed that was everything, and gave up. Garrett's nostrils flared. 3 problems in 40 seconds. Dale Prescott could not find 1 flaw in 30 minutes, and you found 3. Dale looked with his eyes, Owen said. I listened. Garrett grabbed Owen by the neck and spun him toward the crowd. He listened. Everyone. Standing ovation for the engine whisperer. Get this freak a Grammy and a sandwich. The lot erupted. Vince mocked Owen by pressing his palms on an invisible engine with closed eyes, and the crowd chanted, "Crawl, crawl, crawl." But one person did not laugh. At the back stood a woman with gray hair and a bun, reading glasses hanging over a navy windbreaker. She looked like a grandmother at a Sunday market. She was Eleanor Graves, 68 years old, retired chief engineer at Harley-Davidson's powertrain division in Milwaukee. For 31 years, Eleanor Graves designed, tested, and certified every engine leaving the Harley factory floor. She held 4 patents on valve train geometry and wrote the diagnostic guide sitting in every shop in America. While visiting her daughter in Detroit, a wrong turn on Michigan Avenue drew her to a noisy crowd of bikers. Curious, she pulled over and watched Owen Fletcher with a look nobody there recognized, because none had ever seen Eleanor spot rare, undeniable genius. Owen knelt down, checking the phone timer. 1 minute and 12 seconds gone. 3 minutes and 48 seconds left. I am going to fix all 3 in order, Owen said. Timing chain first, then carburetor, then electrical ground. Before he could move, Garrett stomped forward, grabbed a fistful of his shirt, and violently yanked the kid up off his knees.
"You listen to me, you little piece of filth,"
Garrett snarled in his face.
"You break one bolt, one wire, or scratch that chrome, and I will personally make sure you never hold a wrench again. I will snap every finger on your hands."
Owen held his steady gaze and whispered,
"I understand."
Garrett shoved him down hard. Owen's knees slammed into the asphalt, but he didn't make a sound.
"Clock is ticking, boy. Crawl position is waiting."
Vince cracked his knuckles while two bikers boxed Owen in their dark shadows, looming over the engine. They stood, hovering, eager for the moment they could drag him across the lot. The crowd pressed closer, with 60 phone screens glowing in the summer heat. The live stream viewers skyrocketed, 200, 500, 1,000. Cruel comments poured in fast, people joking that the kid was absolute toast and there was no way he fixes that bike in 5 minutes.
"Somebody call this boy's mama," popped up on screen.
But Owen tuned out every jeer, every mocking laugh, and every glaring camera flash. He reached down and picked up the half-inch Craftsman, his late father's worn wrench, with the familiar chip on the jaw, and locked it onto the first bolt of the cam cover. His hands never shook once. His breathing stayed slow and steady. His eyes focused as if the rest of the universe had vanished. Watching from the fringe, Eleanor Graves uncrossed her arms. She immediately recognized the master technique in his grip, the precise tilt of his wrist, the calculated pressure of his fingers, the way he braced his elbow against the iron cylinder for leverage. It wasn't just textbook form. It was pure, unteachable instinct. Quietly pulling out her phone, she started her own stopwatch. 3 minutes and 30 seconds remain. Owen exhaled once. The first bolt spun off in 3 seconds flat. His fingers danced with a veteran's precision, lifting the cam cover clean off without a single fumble.
He worked as if he had torn down that exact engine 1,000 times before.
Beneath the removed cover sat the timing chain, a heavy steel loop of roller chain wrapping around the cam sprocket and the crankshaft sprocket, sinking the upper and lower halves of the motor's breathing system. On a healthy shovelhead, that chain stays tight and true, every link resting snugly on its gear tooth. But this one hung off. Shifting his $2 flashlight onto the cam gear, Owen spotted the culprit immediately. 2 teeth off. The chain had jumped forward by exactly 2 notches. It was a subtle, nearly invisible flaw. A modern motorcycle computer would trigger an instant diagnostic warning. But on a mechanical 1972 shovelhead running old-school ignition points, there were no sensors or dashboard lights. Just a stubborn engine refusing to fire because the valves were opening milliseconds late, killing all compression. Timing chain slipped 2 teeth, Owen muttered softly. He wasn't speaking to Garrett or the hostile crowd, but to himself, just like his dad used to talk through a diagnosis out loud. With practiced speed, he loosened the gear bolt, rotated the sprocket backward 2 clicks by hand, and felt the steel links drop into groove. He tightened the bolt down, pressed his thumb halfway along the chain, and verified the deflection purely by touch. 12 seconds flat. The entire internal fix took 12 seconds. Standing near the edge, mechanic Dale Prescott went pale. He had wasted 30 minutes poking that bike with a $4,000 scanner and missed it completely. Scanners search for computer signals that simply do not exist on a vintage '72 shovelhead. Owen diagnosed it with his ears and a cheap flashlight. "That is 1 down," Owen stated calmly. Garrett glared at him. "Lucky guess," Garrett barked at the cameras. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut.
Garrett raised his voice so every smartphone microphone caught his sneer. One lucky poke doesn't make you a mechanic, boy. My dead grandmother could have nudged that chain back by accident. You want a cookie or something? You want me to clap? He began slow clapping with sarcastic slaps, and 60 pairs of hands immediately joined in to mock the kid. "Clap louder, boys," Garrett shouted. The car wash kid actually did something right. Alert the president. Vince lunged forward, grabbing Owen by the shoulder and spinning him hard. "You got lucky once, Roach. Touch that engine again and I will break that wrench and feed you the pieces." Owen just turned back to the machine without uttering a syllable. With 4 swift turns of a Phillips screwdriver, he pulled off the carburetor bowl. Inside sat the brass float pontoon that controls gasoline flow. It was jammed wide open, wedged tight by a microscopic speck of crusty gasket material caught against the bowl wall. Because that needle valve stayed stuck open, raw gasoline poured endlessly into the throat, flooding the cylinders and pooling right on top of the pistons. Liquid gasoline cannot compress, creating a complete hydraulic lock. Even with perfect engine timing, that motor never would have started. This was high-paid specialist Nolan Briggs' fatal oversight. He had cleaned every single internal jet, but failed to test the brass float under mechanical load. On a vintage 1972 Cahin Butterfly carburetor, the float mechanism looks fine, unless you press one specific pivot point. Owen placed his index finger on that exact hinge and nudged it 15 degrees off axis. Pop. The microscopic debris broke free, the pontoon dropped to neutral, and the valve clicked shut. Owen held up a speck smaller than a grain of rice. "Here is why she flooded," he announced clearly. Nolan Briggs pushed through the onlookers, his face twisted, not in anger, but raw panic. Look at Nolan's face in that moment. It wasn't fury burning in his eyes, but the suffocating shame of a supposed expert watching his professional reputation evaporate on a live broadcast. "I checked that float mechanism." Nolan stammered defensively. "I swear I checked it twice." "You checked it while it was already fully assembled," Owen replied gently, without a shred of arrogance or malice in his voice. "That trapped speck only reveals itself when lateral pressure hits 15 degrees off axis. It is a documented factory flaw on pre-74 Cahin carburetors. In fact, Harley-Davidson released an official technical service bulletin addressing this exact flaw back in 1978, bulletin number HD-78-041. Silence fell over the front row as the kid rattled off exact corporate engineering history like casual trivia. Low murmurs rippled through the spectators. A factory service bulletin cited verbatim from memory by a ragged kid in scuffed shoes. Garrett stepped in, aggressively jabbing 2 thick fingers into Owen's chest so hard the boy stumbled backward. "So you memorized some serial number," Garrett sneered. "My grandma memorizes bingo cards, and that doesn't make her an engineer." "2 problems down," Owen stated calmly, brushing his chest. Garrett flushed dark purple with rage. "2 lucky guesses make you a freak who got lucky twice," he roared, grabbing Owen by the collar and hoisting him onto his toes until shirt buttons snapped. "You have a loud mouth for someone surrounded by men eager to shut it permanently. One more whisper, and I will break your jaw." He slammed Owen back down onto the pavement. As Owen caught his balance, another biker viciously kicked his metal toolbox across the asphalt, sending sockets scattering everywhere. "Tick-tock, garbage boy," Garrett laughed. Showing zero panic, Owen walked over to the dented toolbox, picked it up, and methodically gathered his scattered sockets without rushing a single motion. When he set the organized kit back beside the bike, the cruel laughter in the lot had died down. Spectators shifted uneasily, exchanging nervous glances.
Near the metal fence, a woman nudged her husband and whispered, "How on earth did that kid know an old factory bulletin number?" In the front row, a teenager finally lowered his smartphone, not to end the live stream, but to actually watch the magic with his own naked eyes. An older veteran near the back shook his head in awe and muttered aloud, "Lord have mercy." Through all of this shifting energy, Eleanor Graves remained frozen in absolute stillness, her eyes glued to Owen.
Here is what nobody else knew Eleanor typed. Bulletin HD-78-041, herself 30 years ago, on Juneau Avenue in Milwaukee. It sat on page 14 of the 1978 Diagnostic Guide. She remembered the heavy keys of her office typewriter, yet an 18-year-old had just quoted her exact words. Her hand trembled against her hip as the timer hit 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Owen slid flat onto the warm asphalt beneath the engine frame, rough gravel digging into his shoulder blades as he hunted for the hidden electrical fault. Above him, onlookers leaned in with glowing phones angled down like spotlights. The stream surged past 4,000 viewers, and the chat went silent. Even arrogant Vince took a step backward, not out of newfound respect, but terrified of being caught on high-definition video when this kid proved him completely wrong. "Come with me. Let's look at this together." Owen aimed his flashlight, hitting the ground wire junction. One simple bolt held the engine strap to the frame rail. On paper, it's the easiest connection on a motorcycle. In reality, it's the most ignored failure point on any vintage bike. The bolt was tight, the wire perfectly whole, but Owen scraped his thumb across the contact plate, uncovering thick green oxidation. That copper carbonate, born from months of road salt, created just enough resistance to kill the spark. It would never trigger a standard voltage meter, but it would make that engine crank endlessly without firing. This was the original mechanic's fatal blind spot. Those diagnostic probes only tested the main wire, completely missing the dead, crusty metal hiding right underneath the head of the bolt. The hidden electrical resistance lived right at that tiny contact point. It was a patch of corroded metal no modern software could ever catch on a 54-year-old motorcycle. Owen calmly pulled a strip of emery cloth from his jeans. He carried it because his father kept one in his pocket every single day for 23 years. Owen used short, firm strokes until bright copper finally gleamed against clean steel. He laid the ground strap flat and tightened the bolt purely by feel. Firm, then a quarter turn more. Sliding out from under the heavy machine, he stood up and brushed the sharp gravel off his shoulders. The verdict was simple. A bad ground from a corroded junction. That motorcycle had been losing spark for months, growing weaker on every ride, until she finally died completely. Without rushing, he placed every single tool back into its exact spot. The wrench went next to the sockets, the screwdriver beside the flashlight. Everything in its exact place, exactly how Thomas Fletcher had taught him. Owen closed the metal lid. That made 3 repairs. Around him, the parking lot was dead silent. This wasn't the nervous quiet from earlier. This was the heavy sound of 60 people realizing all at once that they were completely wrong. 60 phones kept recording, but nobody was typing. The massive live stream chat froze tight, 4,000 viewers holding their breath. Garrett Steele stood frozen, 6 feet from his motorcycle. His arms hung loose, his mouth slightly open. His eyes were locked on Owen. Those were the very hands the biker boss had just called worthless, now resting on a dented olive-green toolbox bearing the faded name of Thomas Fletcher. Finally, Eleanor Graves stepped forward. The crowd parted for her without thinking. Hardened bikers instinctively stepped aside for a 68-year-old woman in a plain navy windbreaker. She knelt right beside the heavy motorcycle. She pressed 2 fingers against the timing chain. Correct. She pushed the carburetor float, feeling it swing perfectly free. Correct. Finally, she checked the ground junction. Bright copper zero oxidation and a bolt torqued tight. Correct. Every single diagnosis was absolutely flawless. She stood up slowly, looking at Owen with deep recognition. It was the look of someone who had spent 31 years defining excellence, only to find it hiding in the most unlikely place. "Every single one," she said, her voice so quiet that only Owen and Garrett caught the words. "Perfect. I've trained top engineers for 3 decades. Most of them could never do what you just did."
None could do it this fast.
Owen nodded, wiped his grease-stained hands on his jeans, and looked directly at Garrett. "Now try it." Garrett stepped over to his motorcycle. He hadn't sat on it in 3 days. Not since she died on Interstate 94, dragged to this parking lot like a corpse on a stretcher. The biker glared at the teenager. "If this doesn't start, you know what happens," he warned quietly. Owen remained completely silent. He simply stepped back, folded his arms, and waited. Garrett swung his heavy leg over the seat. His hands gripped the bars, guided by the muscle memory of 30 years on the road. His boot found the kickstart pedal. He'd done this 10,000 times before, but this time his foot hesitated. It was just a tiny fraction of a second, but the quiet crowd noticed, and thousands of online viewers would replay that pause for weeks. Then he finally kicked down hard.
Stick with me, because this is where everything changes.
The engine turned over once, letting out a dry gasp before falling dead silent. Owen didn't flinch or blink. Garrett kicked again. This time, the machine caught. A cylinder fired, followed by the second, and the engine exploded to life. It unleashed a sound so powerful it shook the glass along Michigan Avenue. It was a deep, thundering roar that vibrates in your chest before reaching your ears, making your ribs ache. The motorcycle was alive. The exhaust barked twice, then settled into a flawless rhythm, steady, deep, and perfectly timed. Zero hesitation. Just a pure, unbroken mechanical heartbeat pounding through 54 years of American steel. Garrett gripped the bars until his knuckles turned bone white. He cranked the throttle twice, and the heavy machine screamed back instantly.
The response was crisp and hungry, like a chained dog finally breaking free.
In the crowd, the timer on a phone read 4 minutes and 51 seconds. Under 5 minutes, with 9 seconds to spare. Nobody moved an inch. Nobody spoke. The only sound was that massive engine drumming against the evening air, echoing off the concrete walls like distant thunder. Then the emotional dam broke. A woman near the fence let out a raw, involuntary scream of shock. A teenager dropped his phone, entirely ignoring it as the screen shattered on the asphalt. An old man in the back quietly removed his hat, pressing it to his chest. Finally, someone started clapping. Real, genuine clapping. It was the kind of applause that spreads like wildfire. Within 5 seconds, all 60 people were loudly cheering, some with unexplainable tears streaming down their faces.
Online, the live stream chat detonated.
"No way did that just happen. 5 minutes, bro. This kid is a legend." In the real world, Garrett sat on his motorcycle with the heavy engine rumbling beneath him. His jaw clenched so tight his temples twitched. His eyes were wet. It wasn't sadness or anger, but a feeling he truly didn't have a name for. Men like Garrett don't keep words for feelings like that. His late father had built this exact engine by hand. For 3 days, Garrett believed the last living piece of his old man had finally died. But an 18-year-old kid,
A boy he'd just grabbed by the throat and called worthless garbage brought it back to life in under 5 minutes with a dead man's wrench. Slowly, Garrett reached down and killed the engine. The sudden silence that followed was somehow louder than the deafening roar. He just sat there for a long moment, staring.
He swung his leg off the bike, standing face to face with Owen. The crowd held its breath. Garrett stared into the boy's eyes. They were steady, the same eyes that never flinched when he was humiliated in front of 60 strangers. Garrett opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Slowly he reached into his vest and pulled out the thick roll of hundreds. $5,000. He held the money out, his calloused hand visibly shaking. Owen didn't reach for it. "You owe me something else," the teenager said quietly. It wasn't aggressive, just a hard fact. Garrett's jaw worked back and forth. Every biker watched their fearsome president, a man who never backed down, stand frozen in front of a kid. He was struggling to force out words he'd never said before. "You and I have both felt underestimated. So if anyone ever tells you that you're too young to matter, just remember this parking lot." Remember Owen Fletcher's 5 minutes. Remember that everyone here laughed at him, and every single one was dead wrong. This is why you never underestimate the quiet ones. The word finally came out of the biker's mouth, sounding like a thick bone snapping in half. "Sorry." Garrett only said it once. It was a low, rough sound, as if the apology had been buried under 30 years of solid concrete and stubborn pride. He had to crack his own chest open just to let it out. He didn't say it again. He didn't need to. Every phone caught the audio. Thousands of viewers watched a terrifying biker president formally apologize to an 18-year-old kid in a grease-stained shirt. Nobody laughed. Not this time. Owen calmly reached out and took the cash. $5,000. He didn't bother to count a single bill. He just folded the thick roll and slid it securely right into his back pocket. It went into the same pocket where his father's worn emery cloth lived. Garrett turned and walked back to his crew. Nobody dared to joke. Vince, the massive enforcer who'd threatened to snap Owen's wrench in half, respectfully stepped aside without being asked. He stared at the pavement, completely unable to meet the teenager's gaze. Then Eleanor Graves confidently stepped forward. The lingering noise in the lot died. There was something commanding about how she moved, unhurried and deliberate, as if gravity itself was naturally making room for her. "My name is Eleanor Graves," she announced. 31 years as chief engineer in the powertrain division in Milwaukee. She let that weight settle. What this young man just did, 3 faults diagnosed by ear, repaired by hand, under 5 minutes, with tools older than he is something I've never seen, not once in my career. She calmly pulled a crisp business card from her windbreaker. Plain white, simple black text. Picture the scene. Eleanor handed him that white business card like a golden ticket. It was Harley-Davidson's advanced apprenticeship program, offering a full scholarship, free housing, and a salary from day one. "I am personally recommending you," she said. Owen reached out his hand, far steadier than Garrett's shaking grip had been. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied quietly. Right beside them, a kid with a cracked phone zoomed in, and the live stream caught every single second. Within 24 hours, the clip hit 1 million views, exploding across TikTok, Instagram, and Reddit threads. But before the viral headlines hit, he was just an 18-year-old standing under an orange Detroit sky, holding $5,000 in his pocket, with his father's tools at his feet. The fallout was brutal and instant. Headlines blasted across the web.
Teen mechanic humiliates biker gang in 5 minutes. Dale Prescott felt the shockwave first. He ran the biggest garage in Wayne County, boasting 40 years of experience and a wall of certificates. But the next morning his phone rang non-stop with cancellations. If a kid with a flashlight spots what you missed in 30 minutes, why pay you $200 an hour? That was the polite version. Dale lost 11 clients that first week, watched his revenue drop 40%, and laid off 2 technicians. Those framed diplomas hadn't changed, but the eyes reading them had. Meanwhile, Nolan Briggs had it much worse, as online sleuths dug up the exact broadcast clip where he claimed he checked that float twice. Editors put Nolan's claim next to footage of Owen clearing the blockage in 2 seconds flat. It became a meme overnight, and "I checked it twice" turned into a punchline across every bike forum. 2 major clubs, the Great Lakes Heritage Riders and the Motor City Vintage Collective, canceled their contracts within days. A third club sent a cold letter stating they decided to go in a different direction. Then came Curtis Wade, who became the internet's ultimate villain. Sleuths spliced his diagnosis of an $8,000 engine replacement right next to Owen fixing all 3 issues in 5 minutes with basic hand tools. That comparison pulled 600,000 views, with crowds mocking an $8,000 bill for a job finished with sandpaper and a wrench. Curtis wiped his social media within 72 hours, and his site went dark a day later. One former client left a brutal review that read, "Ask him about the Shovelhead." And then there was Garrett Steele. Garrett didn't lose his business or his club badge, but a tense shift settled over the Detroit Hells Angels. News travels fast, and every regional chapter heard the story. Their president had wagered $5,000, choked and spit on a teenager, then stood frozen while that kid proved him wrong in front of the world. At the next regional meeting, a rider from the Toledo chapter leaned in during a break and asked casually, "So, did you really spit on that kid?" Garrett just turned around and walked out of the room without uttering a word. 3 weeks later, when a rider called seeking a mechanic for a vintage knucklehead, Garrett gave him a name. "Call Owen Fletcher," he said. "He is the best I have ever seen." It was the closest Garrett would ever come to an apology. Meanwhile, Owen used his $5,000 to clear his grandmother's back taxes, cutting the heavy padlock off the family garage on Gratiot and Concord. Stepping inside on a quiet Tuesday, he took in the scent of motor oil and dust. Carefully, he hung his father's tools on the pegboard, placing that chipped half-inch Craftsman wrench right on the center hook. Sunlight hit the floor for the first time in 2 years. That evening, Owen sat on an overturned bucket, pressed his ear against his first customer's engine, and smiled. It was the exact same smile his father, Thomas Fletcher, used to wear in that very shop. Quiet, unshakable, certain. It was the mark of a true craftsman who listens patiently before he ever touches a bolt, knowing deep down that an engine will tell you everything you need to know if you just pay attention. Across the country, his story inspired millions online, rallying communities around phrases like Owen Fletcher 5-minute fix, justice for talent, and never underestimate the underdog. You and I both know how rare these genuine moments are today. So go ahead and pass this story along to someone in your circle who needs a reminder that real dedication, humility, and honest skill will always overcome loud talk and shallow arrogance. Let your hard work shut every single mouth in the room without you needing to raise your voice at all. If this story hit home for you today, be sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our weekly videos celebrating real American grit. And as you go about your day, remember to never underestimate the quiet folks standing in the back of the room.
They are not quiet because they lack confidence or have nothing important to say.
They are quiet because they are patiently paying attention, studying every detail, and truly listening to what matters. And at the end of the day, that is exactly why they win.